Scanning the globe, it's World Affairs Roundup.
The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents World Affairs Roundup, a monthly edition of International Focus, providing opinion and analysis of global events, with John Katzka, a retired member of the U.S. Foreign Service, Ann Hamilton, political scientist at UW-Whitewater, who also served in the U.S. Foreign Service, and Robert Kraig, executive director of Citizen Action of Wisconsin and author of articles and books on American foreign policy. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now, here's your moderator, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus and another edition of our World Affairs Roundup. Our Roundup regulars are reunited once again to take a look at undeterred. Tensions in Northwest Asia continue to mount as North Korean leader Kim Jong Un ratchets up his nuclear threats. Is this bellicose banter the usual load of kimchi from Pyongyang, or a real change in the region's security environment? Brother, can you spare a euro? New data show unemployment in the Eurozone has risen to unprecedented levels, with Spain leading the misery index at over 26% jobless overall and 55% for young people. As Europe's north-south divide widens, are we coming to a fork in the Autobahn? Indicted and elected. Following a controversial election, Kenya's Supreme Court has signed off on Uhuru Kenyatta as president. The good news for Mr. Kenyatta and for Kenya is the opposition seem to have accepted the verdict. The bad news is he still faces indictment by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. How will this impact U.S. relations with a critical African ally? And not amused. In a move reminiscent of the Mubarak era, Egyptian satirist Bassem Youssef was detained briefly and could face formal charges for insulting President Morsi and Islam. His arrest and that of other activists has prompted sharp exchanges between U.S. State Department representatives and the Egyptian government. What does this incident say about the trajectory of Morsi's Egypt, and how will Washington respond? Well, welcome back, everyone. I think this is the first time in a while we've all been together. So I would like to start, if we could, with Korea. And John, maybe you can just tell us, where are we now? Who's done what, tit for tat?
Well, we have, as my British friends would say, a rather tense situation. It goes back probably before, but let's start with the February 12th nuclear explosion, the nuclear test that North Korea conducted, followed quickly by a UN Security Council resolution 2094, which added additional sanctions against North Korea. China participated in the positive vote in the vote on that. Then we move on from there to North Korea declaring war against the United States and South Korea conducting military maneuvers in the region. I believe they were planned, but they probably enhanced them somewhat. We had B-52 flyovers on March 25. We had B-2 flyovers on March 28th. Brings us closer to the date. We now have North Korea allegedly moving, because we haven't gotten any physical information on it. The South Korean foreign minister is reporting that they have moved one of their either intermediate or intercontinental missile on a mobile platform close to the coast. Now, everything I've heard says this missile has never been tested, so let's not get too excited about that. What we have seen is a ratcheting up, either in response to something that the other side did, or something that would cause the other side to ratchet up further. The good news that I heard, this is Thursday, is that Washington now is being more careful about adding additional fuel to the fire.
So, Ann, we've sort of seen a variation on this act before, haven't we? Where the regime sort of acts out and then walks it back a little bit. Is this different in any way?
Well, it's different because there seem to be responses by North Korea every single day, and with Kim ratcheting it up every single day and actually talking about using nuclear weapons against the United States. I don't think that he's said that before. And something else that's new that makes it a little bit, so that people are getting more and more concerned, is that he's a new leader. He's young. He's 30, and he doesn't, he had been promoted by his father in the military without any experience. So we don't really know too much, but there's an assumption that there's a power struggle of some sort, or some effort by him to gain, status with his people and with the military. And also in South Korea, there's a new president who also hasn't been tested. So there's a lot more room for miscalculation, is what a lot of people are saying.
And Robert, to date, the Obama administration has been practicing something it termed strategic patience with the regime, where you just sort of let it all sort of roll off your back. Is there a limit to that, and what might a red line be?
It's a little like giving a child a timeout, I'm afraid. This is an unstable power, and it's made more unstable by the fact it's a new untested leader, as Ann was talking about. And given that he's been much more specific in his threats than before, than his father ever was, it seems like there needs to be some sort of latitude given so he has a way to back down. If you back him entirely in a corner and some power struggle internally means he has to be strong, then maybe he does something. There's a bad miscalculation, and we have, violence or war, and there are nuclear weapons involved. And moving the missile to the coast and all that, it may not be serious, but it certainly makes it seem even more threatening and more like saber rattling. So we have not canceled the maneuvers, which Bill Clinton did a couple times when he was president. But I think it would be wise to give them space, because they really don't have anything other than these threats, and we don't want to force him or push him into something much worse that could cause war or cause serious violence.
But we've been talking a little bit about the domestic aspects of this on the North Korean side. Is there a domestic aspect on the American side as well? I mean, is there a point at which we have to be seen as doing something?
I don't see it. I think this one is outside of the partisan divide we have in the country. I mean, there might be some people calling for tougher action and things like that, but the president, I even missed a couple of things that the U.S. has done. The nuclear defense system in Guam, as well as a high-tech destroyer off the coast of South Korea to guard against these missile attacks. But I think more important is, where are the Chinese on this one? China is really caught in the bind on this. In terms of dealing with North Korea, we have the advantage of having China there, because they have much more at stake than we do in terms of resolving this. Now, they just voted positively on the UN sanctions, but they have been the patron of North Korea for a long time. It reminds me a little bit of what we'd have to deal with Israel. People keep saying we should tell Israel to do this or do that. Well, I think China's caught in a similar position with North Korea. I mean, everyone expects that they can be able to pull the strings there, but I'm not sure that they're capable of doing that.
Well, and one interesting aspect of it is that you have Russia coming out publicly against the North Koreans, and the Chinese obviously getting more and more frustrated with their resolution, as John's mentioned. So it seems to be one issue where most of the world is together for once.
It's pretty far away now from being a domestic issue for the Obama administration. I mean, if they tried to launch a missile at Guam, that was off the coast, and that would change things. I think short of doing something that Obama's opponents could claim was somehow surrendering or kneeling down to Kim, that he has a great deal of latitude on this.
I think so.
Yeah,
I agree.
So one thing that you hear talked about somewhat less is the sort of Japanese dimension. Now, there was a time when the most rightmost fringe of the Japanese body politic was talking about changing the Constitution and considering nuclear weapons. Do you think that that's changing? I mean, does this have the effect to sort of shift that rhetoric much more to the mainstream?
I've seen something recently where the Japanese are considering, first of all, in terms of their maritime, because they are in a struggle in the South China Seas with China. but also in terms of advancing, but I didn't see advancing their military capability, but I didn't see anything about nuclear yet.
Right. I haven't either.
And they would, if you say, had to have to change the Constitution. It would be a major change since World War II. I guess it really depends how the North Korean thing sorts itself out, because we don't know if this is going to be permanently like this, or it'll go back into the old relationship. But I think John's right. China is probably a much bigger issue than North Korea for this.
But it plays into the Chinese dimension, does it not? I mean, the last thing China wants is a more bellicose set of countries surrounding it in the region, armed to the teeth.
Well, but also China has no interest in seeing a united Korea. United Korea becomes a much bigger player, kind of like the United Germany became in Europe.
Which is a wonderful segue to our next story. Now, what do we make of this data that came out this week showing really unemployment in the Eurozone at unprecedented levels? I mean, higher than it's ever been since the common currency was established.
Well, the situation is pretty severe. As you said in the intro, there's 26% unemployment in Greece and Spain, and then between 55 and 60% youth unemployment in both countries. France's unemployment is increasing as well, and there's no credit for any kind of investment there on the private side, so that you have the European Central Bank having given debt to the bailout some of the sovereign banks, but the private companies don't have any access to credit, and it's just a really desperate situation, particularly for youth.
Well, and as bad as the situation would be somehow if it were universally shared, I mean, the aspect of this North-South split is politically explosive, isn't it?
So this is the income inequality problem we have in the U.S., but imagine it was different countries, right? And one country had a much stronger role, that is Germany, and is seen as forcing austerity down the throats of the rest of the region. And you have this temporary shared currency and a question of whether the Eurozone will survive. So you add it all up, you have a dysfunctional Italy right now where they cannot get a government, right? Tremendous problems in Spain, both economic and political, in Spain and Greece. And so this is a huge problem, and the Germans seemingly unwilling to yield, being very Teutonic in their press forward with their position with Merkel. So it not only affects Europe, though, it affects the whole world. I mean, if Europe sinks into a depression, that's going to throw us into another world recession as well.
Europe is in a recession.
But deeper, closer to a depression, I'm saying, as opposed to a recession. But to be honest, we have these sort of issues in the United States. I mean, the unemployment levels we're talking about are similar to the African American male unemployment levels in the city of Milwaukee. And those are, but in this case, we have the whole question of the euro and trying to knit these economies together into it, and the world economy.
So, just in the few seconds before our break, at what point does this transition from being an economic problem to a sort of existential political problem?
Well, it's already a political
I agree,
problem.
it already has.
German elections are 6 months away. Right now, Merkel has very high ratings, but that's based on an economy that's going literally full out.
Well, German unemployment in this same study was
5%.
Yeah.
That range.
Yeah.
So, well, next year at this time, will we be talking about 17-country Eurozone and a united EU?
The capacity of organizations to muddle through always astonishes the observers.
I used to think that it would stay together, but now I'm beginning to think it won't.
We really are at the critical period. I mean, if it doesn't start to stabilize, or at least stabilize, if not improve very soon, it certainly looks like it's going to come apart. Politically, how that happens is hard to guess.
We'll have to look at that next year at this time. But first, we'll take a short break and be back with more.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus and our World Affairs Roundup. And maybe you could take the first swing at our next story. Tell us a little bit about the controversy around the election in Kenya.
Well, there was an election recently in Kenya in which the two main candidates were, one of them is the son of the leader, Jomo Kenyatta, and he is apparently the richest man in Kenya. He ended up winning the election. He joined with a rival of his from a different tribe as the vice presidential candidate, and they squeaked through in the first round with 50.7% of the vote against a candidate that had been backed not very subtly by the United States and other countries. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that the new president, Kenyatta, has been indicted by the International Criminal Court, accused of having incited death squads during the last elections, which took place in 2007, 2008.
So the results of that last election, of course, were much more problematic.
Right, about 1,000 deaths and continued conflict between the various tribes involved.
So Robert, among the people opining on the situation were Secretary Kerry, it wasn't Secretary, this was Johnny Carson, the State Department's point person on Africa, who said that choices have consequences as sort of an implicit threat to the electorate. Well, the Kenyans have made their choice, so what are the consequences?
And it probably aided Kenyatta because there's been this nationalist upsurge around American and Western interference, not just in Kenya, but across Africa. And so it caused a lot of hard feelings. And I assume this is not Johnny Carson, the talk show host. This is someone else.
Assistant Secretary.
Right. So, look, it's a difficult situation, right? You have someone who, look, it's not as bad as having the war crimes committed after the last election, but now you have someone who's been indicted as a war criminal as the head of the nation. So Western countries, Europe, United States, want to have a policy where they have only necessary contacts with him because of this. But on the other hand, you have other countries in the world, China, for example, that don't have any such qualms and are happy to come in and scoop up various business relationships. And this is the gateway to business in East Africa. And so it's a difficult sort of dilemma. And we'll see there's an open question whether the ICC can have a very, very good investigation where they can get evidence. They had to drop charges against an official right below the president and vice president because they couldn't get anyone to cooperate.
So let's talk a little bit about that sort of Chinese dimension, which seems to be present in so many of the stories that we cover. This is a very different landscape, is it not? This is a Kenya that can say no.
There are more and more groups and countries in Africa who are looking askance at Chinese benevolence as they try to capture as much resources as they can to keep their industries going. So China's at a crossroads right now in Africa and other developing countries as well.
So what about other countries? It's certainly not limited to just China. There are other parts of the world actively courting people in Africa, right?
Well, Latin America. I know before Hugo Chavez's death, Venezuela was active. In other countries, it's open. It's open season in Africa. Everybody's there trying to get their contracts locked in and take advantage of all the potential for growth.
Well, there's a security component to this for the U.S. particularly, isn't there?
Well, yes, because Kenya's been very friendly to us as far as letting us have our military operations stage out of there when we send support into Somalia, for example, and try to fight terrorism. Supposedly, it's part of the. I guess I'm not sure if there's a global war on terror anymore. I think maybe we've redefined it. But as far as fighting Al-Shabaab in North Africa, and so there's the military part, the business part, but then the unpleasantness of having someone indicted for war crimes lead a major important country that we've considered an ally over the years. Of course, he is the richest man in Kenya, which shows his father's public service was profitable.
Well, what about this? How advisable is something like Johnny Carson's remarks before the fact, when we really don't have much incentive to do much about it?
or much leverage in terms of dealing with it. We give Kenya approximately $875 million a year in assistance, which probably covers a whole range of things from democracy building to crop substitute. No, they're not crop substitution there, but agricultural incentives and things like that. I think that's going out there in terms of diplomatic. I mean, I'm not sure she could do anything else. Considering the fact that the indictment is out there, if we were to not say something about that, that would come back and haunt us as well. So we're caught between, and we don't have much leverage.
I don't know. I think that we don't know. The case against Kenyatta it's not clear how much evidence there is. It's certainly, when you read about it, you read that he was indicted for this, but all the reading I've done on it doesn't actually say what he did. And given that the United States is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court, does not back it, I think we're in a better position than the British. Where the British were apparently much more open about their distaste for Kenyatta during the election, and also as the former colonial power, I think they're probably in a more difficult position. So I don't think it's as big a deal for the United States as the press is saying.
Well, one thing there'll be much attention paid to is who attends the inauguration. So I don't think there's much of the rumor that the U.S. is going to send Dennis Rodman.
That's been decided.
That's a different country.
It's only ambassadors who are attending.
Well, let's move on to our final story, and also on the African continent, but a bit further north in Egypt. Someone who is typically referred to as the Jon Stewart of Egypt, Bassem Youssef, is a satirist, was hauled in by the regime and may yet be formally charged. And that's response provoked a fairly sharp response from the U.S. State Department. Well, anyone want to jump in on that one?
Well, at least it's not the Johnny Carson of Egypt, right? It's the Jon Stewart of Egypt. But it's interesting because it gets more attention in the U.S. because it's a comic, someone who's been on Jon Stewart, right? So, but it does reveal, shall we say, distinct discomfort with free speech and Western values as far as that. And so it shows how sensitive this regime is and how much it is afraid of criticism. And it also shows the problem with the Muslim Brotherhood and their reaction to Eddie kind of making fun of their religion. I mean, I guess I think there are a lot of people in Egypt who have been more wrongly persecuted and thrown in jail than Mr. Youssef. But Mr. Youssef, this is often what happens in human rights controversies, is someone who has become an international star of some kind, and therefore he draws attention to a regime, and it's damaging to Egypt. And I think it forced the U.S. into taking a position in favor of free speech.
So, do you think it's reflective of a change since the Mubarak era in U.S.-Egyptian relations? I mean, would we have done this during Mubarak's time?
Would we have done this? Someone wouldn't have gotten forward to do this in Mubarak's time. I'm very cynical about this story, in that, what did we expect? We got some kids got out on the street and caused what's called the Arab Spring, and we thought that this was a transformation of Egyptian society. Come on, let's get real. That's not going to happen that quickly or that way. The Muslim Brotherhood is in many ways behaving like other Arab countries are behaving on the subject, first of all, of Islam. Second of all, against authority figures. Just because they had an election doesn't mean they moved to the next stage and all of a sudden and are an open society. That hasn't happened.
So is that a work in progress, or are we just facing a different kind of authoritarian regime and it's just the status quo at this point?
Well, I think that it is part of a larger trend that we're seeing that, unfortunately, because all the attention has been paid to Youssef, there's been some attention paid, for example, about the situation of women being raped and people, prominent leaders saying, well, they deserved it, because they went to Tahrir Square, and no prosecution of that. So I think that there are a lot of human rights issues, and of course, I think it's also that they're paying so much attention to it in Egypt, to the extent that they are, because they've got these food crises, this terrible economic crisis going on, and this is good, a diversion of attention to slam the United States for interfering in their affairs.
Looking at what the U.S. said, both in terms of Victoria Nuland, who's someone I knew in Moscow, who was the State Department spokesperson. She shouldn't be looking for an assignment to Cairo anytime soon.
No. And look, it's interesting. This causes, this may be a next step after Arab Spring in the sense that causes this kind of debate internally.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it at that. Remind you of our Kennan Forum, April 24th. You can go to iwa.uwm.edu for more information. Hope to see you there, and see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website.